is Esther Crawley from the University of Bristol, who is a professor of child health and a consultant paediatrician and NIHR senior research fellow. She is a clinical lead for the Bath Specialist Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Service for children based in the Royal United Hospital in Bath. And she's going to tell us a lot more about her work in her talk, so I'll hand over.
Actually, I think what I'm going to do is tell you all, junior researchers, I'm one of those evil PIs, and a bit of advice. If you talk to Ian, don't have a rant on the phone, because then you get asked to do a talk, and I have got no solutions. I have got just a heap of questions, and I'm hoping you guys are going to help me out. Is that fair enough? And I'm keeping my glasses on for you. He had to add glasses. He said, I can't believe you're wearing glasses. Okay, so I'm actually going to tell you a story, and I'm going to talk about what we do, and then these are my questions, which I'll refer to at the end. Should researchers have access to data without explicit consent? Should we release confidential data under FOI? And how should we protect research? Okay, so I work in a supposedly very controversial field, but it's a really important field. Chronic fatigue syndrome in children is probably one of the most devastating conditions you can have as a teenager. Some of you, in fact, most of you will know someone who has it. So children that come to my clinic, on average, are only attending 2 days a week of school. It affects about 1 to 2% of children. So in secondary school, 1% of children will be missing at least a day a week of school. So if you've got teenagers, 10 or 20 children in their school will have this really awful condition. Despite every time all the efforts we've made to publicise it and tell people about how important it is, children are still spending about 18 months before they even get a diagnosis. And those are the lucky ones. Only about 1 in 10 teenagers and children actually get a diagnosis. Treatment's pretty effective if you get a diagnosis, and it's very ineffective if you don't get a diagnosis and you don't get treatment. Less than 10% will recover at 6 months. Okay, really important condition, but we know very little about it. Now, my research team does a variety of what I would consider to be fairly boring studies. I mean, I love it, but we do epidemiological studies, we do quite a lot of qualitative studies looking at the impact of chronic fatigue syndrome, and we do trials. And we base our trials on questions that are generated from children and their parents, okay? So children and their parents ask us questions, and we do trials to try and answer them. And we publish using open access, we publish CPRD, we publish using ALSPAC, and we also do trials. And I'm going to tell you about all of these trials, but I'm mainly going to tell you about the SMILE trial. We published the results from this last week, 2 weeks ago. As part of our effort in trials, we do quite a lot of trial methodology. I think some of this is the most interesting. We do work on treatment preference. How do children make decisions about going into a trial? Very interested in how children make consent. How do they consent? Very interested in outcome measures, better outcome measures, non-patient reported measures, what patient reported measures are important. So these are all the things that my team does. Okay, so what do we actually do about open access? So this is the paper that was published a couple of weeks ago. So children came to me and said, we want to know whether we should go and have the lightning process. Alternative intervention, not available on the NHS. I was absolutely convinced it wasn't going to work, and we did a trial where we added, so children were randomised to specialist medical care or specialist medical care plus the lightning process. This is the paper, and you can see we've got a data sharing agreement on the paper, and tell you how you can access the data. And actually I was quite interested in what would happen as I was preparing for this talk. So this is, if you click on the DOI, you'll get the statement saying it's not open, it's a controlled data set, and this is why it's a controlled data set. Okay, so this data has a degree of sensitivity involved. So these children, it's a relatively small trial, they're in a defined geographical area, gender and age and school data, in my opinion, means it's very difficult to anonymise this data, if at all. And these children, I'll talk to you, have not given explicit consent for data sharing. You have to fill out a data form like this. This is page 1. And on page 2, you have to tell the Independent Data Access Committee what you're planning to do with the data. Okay, so you apply, and you apply to an independent data access committee, and they make a decision about the data sharing. I went back, actually, as I was working for this talk, and I went and actually dug out the patient information sheets. They're from 2010, and we promised to keep the information private. And this is a photo on my desk from Sunday that shows you the consent form. And you can see on this that the children and parents consented to the study and consented to be interviewed and consented to have the interview recorded. Okay, so, and this is what happened. I love this quote. Jobs that carry a risk, such as volunteering as a human cannonball at a fun fair, and then there's a job of trying to conduct research into chronic fatigue syndrome. Okay, basically when I actually announced that I was going to do this trial, let alone the actual results, just torrent of abuse trying to stop the trial. Okay, these are just articles about it. Church Times, children should not be used as guinea pigs. I reported to the NSPCC, reported to the GMC, that's our regulatory authority. This is quite an astonishing email. I had a few of these, actually. This was from the front page of the Sunday Times. I have permission to publish this. And I have to laugh because, actually, I don't have balls. Well, not the type of balls that they were talking about. Time is running out. Pray to God for forgiveness. Nice. Okay, so you can see that in the context of that, some of our anxiety about having open access data. And this is what I was whinging on to Ian about on the phone, which is why I'm here. Okay, so it's not just, so that's our first trial, but I'm going to tell you briefly about these two trials. So Magenta is a trial that we're doing at the moment. This has been a great trial. We recruited ahead of target. Very few trials do that. It's a very popular trial. Do you know the children and parents in my clinic are passionate about research? They are desperate for more research. They want to help children in the future. And we use a method where we integrate qualitative methods because we really want to understand children's views of treatment. And in this trial, the children love both treatment arms. And in fact, they're super positive about both the exercise arm and the non-exercise arm. We review, I'm diligent about looking for adverse events and so on, and we do everything that you should do properly for a trial. Okay, petitions trying to stop us doing research, big petitions. Fake news is quite a problem for me, so these petitions will say things that are just untrue about what we're doing, so that we are forcing children to have exercise. Actually, exercise therapy, we reduce exercise. The only complaint we get is that we're reducing exercise. I mean, it's quite astonishing. Okay, I really have sleepless nights about lack of service provision for children in the UK. My service is the service in yellow. The white areas, these children have no access to local service provision. Okay, what do we know about this condition? I said at the beginning, only less than 10% of children will get better within 6 months without treatment, and treatment's moderately effective. Okay, but most of the UK has no access to treatment. So FitNet is testing online CBT for children, and so treatment's offered in the children's home throughout the UK. Okay, we publicised this in November last year, 1,000 contacts of patients. Okay, this area of research, patients really want it. People are absolutely desperate for more research. What happened to me as a researcher? Petitions against the research, complaints to funders. BBC received a complaint because they publicised it. You know, I have journalists coming up to me now going, I can't report on this. My life's made a misery if I report on it. We can't even get information about this research out there. Malicious emails, masses of defamation, complaint to the ASA because we had a leaflet for GPs. I mean, it's all dismissed. It's always dismissed, but it just takes a lot of time and energy. And the thing I really hate, actually, I really hate the cyberstalking. And if you want to know what cyberstalking is, this is what it is. Apart from the solicitation for sex, I've had all of it. Okay, and it's a crime. It's a crime. So, you're not allowed to do it. For anybody listening to this talk out there, you're not allowed to do it. Just stop, please. Okay, so Ian wants me to say something intelligent about all of this. Should researchers have access to data without explicit consent? Well, I have gone back to the children and the families, and this is what we do. We allow researchers to have access to the data, but it's under strict control. It's under a license agreement. It has to be a researcher in the university, and the agreement is with that university, and they have to sign up to a confidentiality agreement. My huge fear, as you'll see in a minute, is confidentiality and protecting data. I promised those children we would keep their data confidential. That's what I promised. So that's what we do. I still worry about it because the study was done in 2010, 2011, and I worry about the fact we didn't get explicit consent. But that is our view, is that this is the right thing. And people have talked during today about not having the skill set. We don't have the capacity to do the analysis we need to do on this data. We desperately need more research. The children want more research. I don't have the capacity to do it all, so I'm really, really happy if other researchers can make better use of the data. So proper governance, proper controls, independent review of applications, so it's not me making decisions, license agreements with institutions. That's what we do. Okay. This is my big question. I don't know the answer to it, and I really, really value discussion. Should we release confidential data under FOI? Okay, I currently have one going at the moment, and the argument that they're making is, it's fine, you should give me the data, I'm not a researcher, because the data is anonymized. And the question really is, can you truly anonymize this data? Last year, data was released for a trial without consent at all, for the PACE trials, another chronic fatigue trial. And I've got the tribunal report in my bag if anyone wants to see it, over tea. Oh, by the way, apparently we've got cake for tea. Is that right, Ian? Because there was no cake at lunch. Oh, okay, so no cake, guys. All right, but while you're eating your cookie, or half a cookie, as some of us did, if you wish to read the tribunal report on PACE, I've got it with me, I'd be very, very interested, I can send it to you. Okay, so this is coming our way, all right? And I don't know, the more I look into it, the more I worry about de-anonymization. So this is de-anonymization using Netflix accounts. I have told my teenagers. You all know about this? Okay, and you know about this probably. This is all I just Googled. This is last week in The Guardian. So should we release confidential data under FOI? In the case of Smile, it's 100 children in a defined geographical area with school data. As far as I can see, all they need to do is to access school data or access registration lists on a school. And in fact, there are not that many of them that are boys. A boy age 11, I can take out the gender and I can take out the age. And it's absolutely hopeless. Who can analyse the data? It's just a nonsense. I want researchers to analyse the data. I really worry about allowing anybody access to the data, particularly in the context where actually people don't like what we're doing. Or they don't like the answers. They don't like the fact that LP, helped children. Children like the answers. They don't. How should we protect research? Well, last year, apparently, some of my favourite people came and talked, Stephen and Dorothy, and they say it all in this fabulous article produced in Nature, and they make some really good comments, and I don't know, I think this would really provide a solution for us. Okay, so I pre-register my trials. I publish protocols. I publish analysis plans. I publish them well before I do the analysis so people can actually criticize me and change it. We do behavioral stuff. All our data is there. Our methods allow you to reproduce it. And we do all of that. And it seems to me that those who want to access my data should do the same thing. The reanalysis of some of these trials, nobody's pre-published analysis plans, nobody's said which data, nobody's said what they've cut out, nobody's actually said before they did the analysis what they're going to do. What they have said is, we'll prove that you're fraudulent or we'll prove you wrong without doing the same things that we do. In general, critics and original researchers should obey symmetrical standards of openness and responsibility. It should be fair. And I think if they did all of that as well, we'd actually have some idea of the number of times they're going to reanalyse it. Because this is one of the other concerns that somebody else brought up, is that actually they just reanalyse and do another and so on until they get the result they want. I also believe that there should be symmetrical scrutiny concerning conflicts of interest. I declare who funds me, and as do my researchers. But, you know, some of the people that are trying to stop our research crowdfund to stop research. They didn't declare it. So I think it should be fair that if we all believe in pre-registration, publishing protocols, publishing analysis plan, publishing financial conflicts of interest, and I think those who are going to reanalyse our data should do the same. But, hey, what do I know? So, in summary, ahead of time, because you all need your cookies, the kind of message that's most important to me is this is an area where we're desperate for research. I don't have capacity to do it. If any of you guys want to access my data, I would love that. But I also believe that children with chronic fatigue syndrome are vulnerable children with a lot of sensitive data, and they need to be protected. Discuss the release of data to researchers, issues of releasing data under FII. I'd be very interested in your views on this. And I think we should just consider equity, governance, and also a message you've heard often, get your data sharing in early. If you look at those consent forms, you know, it's different now. Our consent forms really inform people properly about data sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have some time for questions. Do we have any in the room? Oh, Cyril.
Hi, thanks. Jonathan Tedds at Leicester. Thank you for really well describing the sort of the dilemmas that people face in these areas. I wondered if you thought there was a role for data papers, perhaps, that describe data without necessarily giving access, if it's not appropriate, you know, public access to data sets. So it's really enabling other people to know more about data that's being analysed and published, or the analysis has been published, in a way that allows people to know what data's out there, and that rewards the effort to do curating the data through traditional citations. So the sort of data journal idea. I'm just interested what you're thinking.
Yeah, it's a really good idea, and we're particularly interested in where we can combine data. Yeah. So we've got collaboration. We're combining a lot of data from infectious disease cohorts. So these are multiple infectious cohorts where they've got fatigue data afterwards. Yeah. And in fact, there's one that's under review at the moment, just combining all of the and exactly all of the variables there and the metadata that's available and how you can access it. And because we actually think that actually a way forward is rather than each of it, well, it's the obvious solution, isn't it, that we combine data and get better answers. But we probably should be more diligent on that. I think you can understand my hesitation sometimes.
Yeah, there's a dilemma for PIs, isn't there? Sorry, just to finish off. So I think PIs can play a really important role here, though, in just saying it's okay to spend, as well as the main analysis papers, it's okay to spend a little bit of time doing what is often quite a short description piece, and there are a number of ways of doing it.
Absolutely crucial that as we collect the data, we get all the processes for metadata and data management set up right at the start. I completely agree.
Sure.
Okay, there was another question here.
This is when I reflect back to the lunchtime conversation and realise that, did you all know, removing the face actually meant removing the face?
Yes. Yeah, so actually a bit of follow-up on our discussion at lunchtime. So when you talk about you were worried about identification, so what real risk do people that we could re-identify? What real risk for these people? So I take your data and I can say, okay, these are I can identify these 5 kids from that school. So
okay, so I think what you're saying is if a child got identified, what's the problem for that child?
Yeah, do we know? Do we have any evidence out there of what can happen?
I can give you straight off some answers. First of all, completely incorrectly in my opinion, if you have had chronic fatigue syndrome as a child, even though you make a full recovery, you can't get a job in the services. These children have data on depression and anxiety. Many of them are bullied because they're not at school. It's still a stigmatising condition. Do we really want them? Most of them don't talk about their illness. So I showed in a picture of an accelerometer. A lot of people saying we need more objective data. I agree. Accelerometer is that little red thing. Children won't wear it because they don't want people in their class to know it's them. And then we also link our data to parental data on not working or loss of work productivity. I don't think any of the parents would want to be identified. I really believe that. And also, on another level, if you talk to patient groups, okay, if you recover and you declare to the patient organisation, or if you say, you declare that you've recovered, you get attacked for probably not having had chronic fatigue syndrome in the first place. This is not an illness you want people to know about.
A question over here. I'll go.
Do you think it's maybe a reasonable compromise to share data with researchers only and not with the public?
Well, absolutely. That's why I showed you all our data sharing attempts. Yeah, so I'm thrilled if researchers use our data because we are so desperate for more research and I don't have capacity to do it all. Thrilled.
Another question here.
Just a question. You heard me?
Yeah.
I see you have a lot of problem in your investigation and public and some groups challenging this activity. Can you tell me that anybody challenging you as a principal investigator, maybe calculating you are pediatrician, so maybe this chronic fatigue syndrome be more familiar with psychiatry or psychology in such a way? Just to challenge you as a principal investigator as not appropriate person for leading the project.
Is the question that it's not appropriate for me to lead it because I'm a paediatrician?
Yes.
No, I've never been challenged on that. Some of the fake news, though, is that I'm a psychiatrist.
I see.
I'm not. Or a psychologist. I'm also not.
I heard that. Thanks.
Okay, we have some questions here. The first one is, how can we make it easier and clearer for patients to give permission to share data if they want to? So I guess it's a question about the consent process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually the children... so at the moment we consent children completely appropriately for any researcher to use the data, and we don't have any problem with that, and we actually explain to them what we think that means as well, and we record all of those discussions so we can check that they're getting the proper explanation. I think there's a piece of work potentially to do about retrospective consent for data that we've already got. My view is that even though we haven't got explicit consent, the patients in my advisory group and so on, they're so desperate for research, and the view I have is that they want researchers to do it. I don't know if I've answered that question. I'm really kind of here for answers. If any of you guys got any answers for me?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I was going to make a comment, but Kirsty's asking a question. You go for it.
So this is not an answer. It's another question. So I think your talk was a really sort of fascinating sort of personal story of the challenges and the difficulties. And it reminds me of colleagues of mine. I did my PhD in neuroscience, and I have friends who do animal research who had activists go to their kids' soccer games and heckle them and sort of you've seen houses being firebombed and things like this because of the research that they do. So I wonder if you could speak about the sort of the distinction between the challenges faced by the participants, the children whose data who may be identified as a result of sharing the data, and also what protections we can put in place for researchers who do very valuable work, as you are doing, and what can sort of institutions do to support them better?
Okay, so 3 questions. I think it's really important to separate out the people that are trying to stop compared to the children and parents. Children and parents in our clinic really want the research. And I think my view is that the way we've done the data sharing, which means that there's a license agreement and a confidentiality agreement to researchers and institutions, in my view, that is as good as we can get in terms of protecting the data. So I feel with our data, our open data that we've got at the moment for all researchers to access, that's good. And I believe that that'll keep the data confidential. When I talk about the risks of de-identification, it's talking about releasing it to the general public without a confidentiality agreement, without a license, without an institution, to non-researchers. That worries me. So I hope that separates it out. Protecting researchers, actually, the University of Bristol's been really good at that. It's really, really hard. And one of the things that's really hard is because it's actually very difficult to talk about. And I think chronic fatigue syndrome is considered the worst area to work in. But a lot of people will have this on a level, and we don't talk about it. And I think it's a bit like the fact that nobody really talks about miscarriage. And then you start to talk about miscarriage, you find that loads of people have had it. And actually we need to talk more about it, and we need to really support each other. And we need to go, actually, for me, it's been about everything I do gets reviewed, and I work very strongly with governance and all these people. And it's them saying, actually, you know what, Esther, we've looked at everything again and again and again, and actually what you're doing is okay, and actually stop worrying and get on with the research. Does that answer your question a bit?
Question here, Elizabeth? Yeah, microphone's just coming down to you.
Talking about things that we don't talk about, I'm just curious, how much do you think of the harassment, etc., that you suffer is actually because you're a woman? How much of it is actually gendered?
Excellent question. I don't know. I mean, they did think I was a man, didn't they? I don't know, the cyber stalking, I have thought that sometimes, I would say. The way every single thing that you've ever done is monitored and scrutinised and reflected. There's a lot of energy goes into this. A lot of energy. I was going to tell you a story, but I think I'm going to save it for biscuits.
Can I just share a quick story from we were with the Wellcome Trust last week organised a meeting on data sharing that was looking at experience of groups in Africa, and it was quite interesting that you've got people who are working with household data, geo-positioned, with very personal data, HIV status, etc. They use data governance practices for data sharing that are very similar to yours, so data agreement, whatever, and they have never, in 23 years of having longitudinal linked personal data, had a breach of confidentiality. So I think that, we worry about these things a lot, but I think there are actually a lot of examples out there in situations where you've got highly stigmatizing data and etc., which are safeguarded pretty well. So I think, we should possibly panic less and look at the examples that are out there, and you're obviously, one of them. So congratulations.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions, which are on the wall there. So, if a researcher requests access to a data set you hold, does a researcher also need to apply for ethical approval from their own university?
I am not. It depends on which data set they're actually asking for access for and what they're planning to do with it. And this is all not managed by me. It's important, I think, that there's a link, so it's managed by the Data Access Committee. It's all the information matters online.
Okay. The next one is, what should you do if in the future the funder who funds the trial stipulates that you must openly share the data you collect?
Well, I guess it goes back to the title of the talk, isn't it? How open's open? Is open to all researchers, or is it open to any member of the public? I think if it was open to any member of the public, I find it hard to believe I would have to do that for this, but, it'd be... I'd probably actually go back to the patients and see what they thought. Okay. If the patients said no, which actually I think they would for public data, I would say no. If the patient said yes, it's fine by me.
Okay, and so slightly related to that, we have a question on, do you think there'll ever be a time when data you collect will be openly shared beyond just researchers?
I don't know the answers to these questions, I'm afraid. I don't know. Yeah. I think there's many more experienced people that know the answer to these questions.
Okay. I just wonder if anyone...
actually my view is that as a PI who actually believes in open access for researchers but also believes in protecting children, you have to remember these are children that come to my clinic and come and see me. My job is not to sort out all of the world problems. My job is to try and do the best that I can to protect the children and make sure that the data is used. If the ICO says that I've got to release the data, and if it gets de-anonymised, at least I've done my bit to protect the children. I think that's as much as I can do. But if any of you guys have got answers, that's all good by me.
Yeah, in terms of answers, I don't know if there's any of the journal editors in the room, but because I'm aware that people that work on journals, we do often quite regularly have researchers sending files, Excel files, which if you open them and look at them, there's quite a lot of personal information in there, and oftentimes there isn't explicit consent for publishing that. So actually quite a really important job of editors is to check for whether consent has been obtained, and often it's not. I just wonder if there's any editors who might want to elaborate on that, if we're sharing experiences here.
Yeah, so I'm Adrian Aldcroft, I'm the editor of BMJ Open.
And we've communicated.
We have communicated, yes. Yes. Yeah, no, it's a really difficult issue because as BMJ Open, we do really encourage people to share their data, or at least to, have some sort of data statement outlining how people could get access to the data. But then we also do have people who are overly keen, and they send us these Excel files that, maybe have the patient's name or have too much information. I mean, there's some guidelines for editors. The rough guideline is that two identifiers, so gender and age is okay if that's in a table, but anything more than that, you'd want consent. And for the most part in publishing articles, from a journal's perspective, do we want any more information than that in a table? But when it comes to sharing data for other researchers, that's a whole other issue. So yeah, I mean, it's a complete grey area. And it's really difficult to come up with easy guidelines for everybody. Yeah, so it's not easy, but we do think that there should be some sort of access to the data.
Yeah, and I think going back to the solving the whole problems of the world, it did strike me. I've talked to quite a lot of people in different institutions, and actually, as far as I can see, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we've got our data access policy, which I've shown you, and it's very transparent and it's done independently. But each institution that I've talked to has got a slightly different policy. And I do wonder whether we should actually be getting together and actually trying to thrash out some of these issues and having consensus, because that would make it much easier for me. I would worry less if I felt I was abiding with the best consensus for this kind of data, specifically data that you haven't got explicit consent for, older data.
Okay, we have another question from Louise.
I just wanted to respond on some of the efforts. Louise Courtier from the Data Archive at Essex, dealing with social science data. Had an archive for 50 years, so we have very old data in there. There is quite a lot of work being done on looking at the issue of open, safeguarded and controlled data, and looking at some common rule sets to deal with that, because most of the data we hold are human data. They're all disclosive if they're released raw, so many of them are not, and the ones that are severely locked down, and they're very hard to get at, and there's a whole ethical procedure of doing that. But there's something called the 5 Safes, which is a framework that's being used more and more by the ESRC and by other funders. And it's looking at safe data, safe projects, safe people, safe setting, and safe outputs. And they're all using similar governance frameworks, similar data sharing models, so that you're not just trusting an access committee, you're trusting the person to be a bona fide researcher, to respect data and understand how it works and not make mistakes. There's a whole set of standardised procedures around disclosure risk and how you assess it, and we do that on a daily basis. So it's not just age and gender, it could be household size, there could be many different variables that are disclosive when you put them together. So in the social sciences and working with the Office of National Statistics, there is a lot of really good guidance, but it maybe hasn't got to the biomedical.
Yeah, and I think you're actually, it sounds like actually you do a lot more work in terms of who actually wants to access the data than we would do at the University of Bristol. And I think that's a really good example of how there's different guidance and different methods in different institutions. It would be really good if we could get consensus on it.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we can break a little bit early, and hopefully the cookies are there, otherwise I better get a taxi.
I can't believe there's no cake.
But what I would say is, can we come back at 3:35, not 3:40, because I think we might have an exciting announcement. But yeah, back at 3:35, please. Thanks to Esther again.